People from all over the world, will take to their streets and squares and demand a true democracy. Keep it moving! Back it up! Give me a thing! All day, all week, occupy Wall Street!
What started as a small group of protesters sleeping in a park in New York's financial district has turned into one of the largest global protest movements in history.
I'm working my butt off and I'm making no profit.
Angered by corporate corruption and greed run rampant, at a time when many Americans are struggling, on September 17, 2011, people from all around the country descended upon Zuccotti Park in New York City, declaring they would not leave until the politicians took notice.
This is not stopping anytime soon.
Take a shower and they can get a job if they went to college.
Is capitalism bad?
While much of the mainstream media mocked and dismissed the Occupy Wall Street movement as a left-wing hippie gathering with no clear message,
oh God,
I decided to live alongside the occupiers.
Off to try to find myself a place to sleep
and see for myself what would inspire Americans from all around the country to drop everything to live in a park in Lower Manhattan.
You'll see there are almost no operating businesses down here.
on both sides.
Yeah, and we're hit hard, hit real hard.
With entire communities decimated by the financial crisis and record levels of unemployment, for some, Occupy Wall Street was their only hope.
The Occupy movement got me excited. You know, maybe we can make some change.
All persons must leave the park. If you refuse, you will be subject to arrest.
From showdowns with the NYPD.
Who here is ready to defend our park?
To intense moments of chaos and violence on the streets. We were there every step of the way.
This is our time! Occupy!
A movement has emerged, saying enough is enough.
We are the 99%!
In December of 2010, a frustrated out-of-work fruit seller in Tunisia set himself on fire in a desperate act of civil disobedience against an oppressive government. The event sparked 3 weeks of mass protests around the country that eventually led to the ouster of the Tunisian dictator, Ben Ali. In a matter of months, similar uprisings spread throughout the Middle East. Collectively called the Arab Spring, the protests toppled dictators in Egypt and Libya and pushed Yemen and Syria to the brink.
All day, all week, Occupy Wall Street!
And then, in July of 2011, claiming inspiration from the youth-fueled movement that had occupied Tahrir Square in Egypt, a small Canadian anti-consumerist design magazine called Adbusters sent an email to its readers calling for an Arab Spring-style occupation of Wall Street in New York City. Their demand, a presidential commission to separate money from politics. Adbusters promoted the event with a poster of a ballerina standing atop the iconic Wall Street Bull. The date was set, September 17th, 2011, in Zuccotti Park in Lower Manhattan. The protesters, mostly young people organized via the internet, took it from there.
Please stay on the sidewalk.
You remain on the sidewalk!
They claimed to be a leaderless movement with no official ties to Adbusters or any other organization.
We are the 99%!
They called themselves the 99%, referring to the great wealth disparity between the rich and poor in the United States.
All day, all week, Occupy Wall Street!
The world would come to know them simply as Occupy Wall Street.
We're occupying Wall Street and gonna make the sun shine. We're gonna write a social contract and make the fat cats outside.
With just a sleeping bag and a backpack, I came to New York to set up camp next to the protesters in Zuccotti Park. By embedding myself into the movement, I hoped to better understand who the occupiers were and what exactly they wanted.
I got their souls!
Zuccotti Park, also known as One Liberty Plaza, sits across the street from the World Trade Center site, in the belly of the beast, as the protesters like to say, just a few blocks away from Wall Street.
Yeah, this is where everyone sleeps. I mean, anywhere there's a spot, they'll sleep. This is the heart of it all.
So what's been the reaction of the bankers in this area to you guys being here?
They don't like us at all, and they want us out of here.
Brian Phillips is a former Marine from Salt Lake City, Utah. Like most of the people in the park, he traveled to New York after learning about the movement online.
So this is the media center. This is basically where they do all the tweeting, the Facebook, the Google+, the live stream. Yeah, this is the head of the snake.
Early on, Zuccotti Park became the symbolic heart of Occupy Wall Street. But the real power of the movement lives online, where organizers urge people from around the world to donate money to the cause, join protesters in New York, or participate in direct actions in their own community.
It's gotten to the point where people are just upset. We've been lied to, you know. They want to stand up and they want to change their country. Yeah. They want to change the world.
Even after the sun set over New York City, life in the park rarely slowed down. The non-stop drumming of the protesters annoyed some, and the debates with passers-by, like this young banker, were constant.
So we're not beating some drums, like it's not gonna do anything. All these people, go get skilled up, go work. There's 3.2 million jobs available right now. We have people today.
Activity in the park raging 24 hours a day. Sleeping at night wasn't always easy.
Earplugs. All right, thank you. So this is where you guys sleep?
Yeah.
This is where we sleep.
Well, thanks for saving me a spot.
Me personally, just as a security precaution, like I always tie my pack off to my mat.
My first night in the park, I found a spot to sleep next to a couple from Iowa. They came to Zuccotti Park to express their anger over America's banking and foreclosure crisis.
What is taking place is quite frankly criminal by any measure or standard, and yet the only person that's going to jail is Bernie Madoff.
If you don't stand up and speak, then it's gonna stay like this. Nothing will change.
I still wasn't sure how sleeping in a park in New York could accomplish any real change in this country. But I was going to stick it out with the occupiers anyway, and see what the movement might be capable of. Coming up.
So when does a protest become grotesque?
The mainstream media paints an unflattering portrait of the Occupy Wall Street movement.
Take a shower and they can get a job if they went to college.
We have been knocked out of our jobs for 3 months! Join us in solidarity!
I woke up each morning in Zuccotti, much the same I went to sleep to each evening. The constant sound of music, political debate, and expression. As the Occupy Wall Street movement grew, the park became a magnet for anyone with a political action, regardless of how obscure or offensive the message.
The Jews control Wall Street!
You want to go around the corner and we'll talk about Jews?
Oh, now you're gonna threaten me? You're gonna fight me? Get out of my face!
Why not?
The Jews control Wall Street!
Racist.
You!
Have you noticed just how incoherent this message is?
Early media attention focused almost exclusively on the carnival aspect of the park and the movement's lack of a single defining message.
Just look at their signs. Lower gas prices, an end to war, empathy.
Is capitalism bad? What? We need to tax the corporations?
Television crews like this one from Fox News came to the park mocking the protesters.
What started as a supposed grassroots movement has turned into a circus.
The protesters, in turn, became hostile and distrustful of the media, including us.
Make sure it's really scrubbed.
If I was going to get the real story, I would need to tell it from the inside and integrate into the community.
I think this is really something to see here, where you have the community that has come together to take care of their living space. And so they're teaching people how to garden that have never gardened before. How long have you been here?
I've been here a week.
Camping out?
Yeah.
And what brought you out?
One tour in Afghan, and here I am.
You were in Afghanistan?
Yes, I was in the Marines.
What do you think your fellow Marines would think about you being here?
Can you see it?
Up with capitalism, down with
I'm
greed.
a business owner, okay?
Yeah.
Corporates are killing my business, okay? I'm working my butt off and I'm making no profit. I'm tired of it.
Like, no one in Washington feels my pain, feels the pressure. My husband has his own business. We're hanging on by a thread.
Occupy Wall Street was striking a chord with a wide section of everyday working Americans.
Do I buy groceries? Do I pay my rent? Do I buy new shoes for my daughter?
I just got here today. I'm just here to learn.
In the early weeks of the occupation of Zuccotti Park, we saw the numbers grow every day as people young and old dropped everything to travel to New York and join the movement.
I think it's an opportunity for the people of the world to take the world back.
The General Assembly will be starting in 10 minutes.
Each night at 7 p.m., rain or shine, the occupiers in Zuccotti Park gathered for the General Assembly. Every major decision of the Occupy Wall Street movement, from organizing protest marches to budget approvals, was made during these meetings by anyone who wished to participate.
The people's mic.
The people's mic
Is only effective.
is only effective
If everyone does it.
The protesters were not allowed to have a sound system in the park.
This means I like what I'm hearing.
A series of hand signals were used to gauge the crowd's reaction and to conduct votes.
This means I'm on the fence.
I propose that we approve the purchase of a 6,500 watt biodiesel generator.
Are there any blocks?
These are capital expenditures.
Hands crossed in an X symbol represented a block vote.
Finance first.
Anyone present at the assembly had the ability to block a proposal, and a 9/10 majority was necessary to move forward on any measure.
Diesel generators.
It was frustrating to sit through meetings that often went on for hours without a single decision ever being reached.
under 10 gallons.
The people are trying to do their best to
I spoke with Heather Gottney, a professor of sociology at Fordham University, about the effectiveness of the General Assembly to govern the movement.
It's a very radically democratic kind of mode of decision making.
Does that work?
Well, it works for some things, and for other things it becomes, difficult. We have the police against us, we have the government against us for the most part, but we need to agree on what to do because we're putting our lives on the line.
People from all over the world. Take to their streets and squares and demand a true democracy.
Off to try to find myself a place to sleep in the rain.
After my first full week living in Zuccotti Park, it was clear that neither the weather nor threats of arrest were going to deter the Occupy Wall Street protesters.
Oh, God. You sleep well like this?
This is my first night here, so I'm obviously not very good at this yet.
Where are you from?
I'm from Syracuse.
What brought you out here?
This is the fight that I've wanted to be a part of for years, and so I'm glad that it's actually happening.
What's up, buddy?
Hi.
Is there somebody sleeping here?
There's 2 spots here, one here and one there.
Cool.
Thanks.
Thanks, man. Everyone's talking about this movement like it's just a bunch of hippies, but I've met a lot of different kinds of people here that are really dedicated to be going through this kind of weather. I was certainly not expecting people to stick around when it rains.
coming up.
Most of the storefronts are closed. You'll see there almost no operating business.
On both sides?
Yep.
We meet a Zuccotti Park occupier who takes us home to see firsthand the struggles of the 99%.
Anybody want a break?
Nearly a month into the occupation of Zuccotti Park, living and work full time alongside protesters in the country.
Buddy?
Yes, please.
Our country.
Rice, buddy?
Yes, please.
Where are you from?
Portland.
Oh, you came here from Maine. Where are you from?
Orange County.
Orange County? I'm from Los Angeles.
Cypress.
Nice. So right now I'm working in the kitchen, which is in the center of the park. They provide about 1,200 meals here a day, and it's all free. Anybody who is at Occupy Wall Street and gets in line for a meal gets fed.
I got in here and I saw, there are a lot of middle-aged, middle-class people like me, but what the camera's focusing on is people with dreadlocks and tattoos on their faces and like that. Well, most people down here don't look like that. This is a working-class movement for working-class people.
We met Fetzer Mills patrolling Zuccotti Park as a member of the security working group.
I can tell you why I came up here. I'm retired Navy, but I live in a small town not far from Memphis, Tennessee. It's one of the hardest hit counties economically. Half the people that live on my street don't have jobs. I gave a lot of years of my life to this country, and it was not so that my countrymen had to live like that.
We wanted to see for ourselves just what would spur someone like Fetzer and so many others in the park to travel so far to be part of a movement like Occupy Wall Street. We arranged to meet up with Fetzer back at his home in Lauderdale County in western Tennessee.
It looks like this neighborhood has seen better days. A lot of these houses are boarded up. Yeah, I don't know what was originally going on in this place, but it's not going on anymore.
We've got a herd of wildcats living here.
So this is you?
Yeah, that's me. I was just turned 18 years old. That would have been in 1978.
Though Fetzer is retired from the U.S. Navy, he still wears his desert combat boots everywhere he goes. He says he finds it insulting when people dismiss Occupy Wall Street, as in his words, just another hippie movement.
Well, you're not going to find a lot of hippies here in Lauderdale County. I don't think. I might be about the closest thing you're going to find to a hippie in Lauderdale County. And everybody out here is very supportive of Occupy Wall Street.
What do you want people to understand about this community here?
There's a myth out there about poor people. Well, there are good reasons why people are poor, and I want to show it to you. You're going to find out today. And it's not because they're lazy, it's not because they don't want to work, it's because they're subject to conditions beyond their control. We're coming through downtown Henning, and most of the storefronts are closed. You'll see there are almost no operating businesses down here.
On both sides?
Yep.
My gosh, everything's gone.
For rent sign there, for rent. Look at this. This is the heartland of the country, and this is what's happening out here. No jobs. I mean, we're hit hard, hit real hard. This was Caldwell Feed and Seed, fairly good number of jobs at one time, but it's closed now. Over here to our right was a box factory. It's closed as well. Just another couple blocks up here, we're gonna go through a whole another just row after row of abandoned factories. This is the street I live on.
We drove down street after street of foreclosed properties and abandoned factories. The hard times first began here in the early 1990s, when the North American Free Trade Agreement enabled corporations to earn record profits by moving American jobs overseas.
Business closed, yes.
The recession and housing crisis of the last few years killed just about whatever life was left in hundreds of communities like Lauderdale County.
Mr. Jones.
A casualty of more than one factory closing, Fetzer's next-door neighbor Brandon Jones told us if it weren't for the prison in town, there would be no jobs left at all.
But there's more people out of work now than there's ever been. I seen, and I mean, even fast food restaurants are turning people away.
What do you think about, there's some people that say out there like, all right, well, those who aren't working, maybe they're just lazy.
I've been to Walmart, just most all the places around.
And are these minimum wage jobs that you're looking for?
They're all minimum.
All minimum wage jobs.
But no one called me for an interview or anything yet.
Yeah. That's tough, man. What's your biggest fear?
Being homeless, not being able to provide for my children, having a stable environment for them.
This was up and running just a few years ago.
Yeah, but was, till fairly recently. There needs to be some level of globalization, but not to the point that, you know, it's okay for American-based corporations to send all of the jobs because they don't want to pay a living wage to American citizens. That's not okay. Yeah, it's extremely depressing. You think no hope, and you really do. I mean, that's another thing that the Occupy movement got me excited about was, you know, for some reason it gave me hope. You know, maybe we can make some change, you know, maybe.
Coming up.
Mayor Bloomberg, what are you going to do when it gets cold? Are you going to allow...
Mayor Bloomberg pays a visit to Zuccotti Park, and the occupiers prepare for a showdown with the NYPD.
Who here is ready to defend our park?
Nearly a month into the occupation of Zuccotti Park, the movement was gaining steam. Key alliances had been forged between Occupy Wall Street and some of New York City's most powerful unions. The protesters organizing daily actions like this one with union workers, marching to the Upper East Side of Manhattan, home to many of the world's wealthiest individuals, the 1%.
We'll march up Park Avenue! We'll march up Park Avenue! And visit many of our billionaire friends!
The crowd marched for over 30 blocks before reaching the home of Rupert Murdoch, chairman and CEO of the News Corp media empire. That includes Fox News.
Hey, Murdoch, hang up there!
I'm not against people being rich if they work hard. I'm against people not paying their fair share and buying the government. That's not democracy.
All of the actions organized Occupy Wall Street are nonviolent by design. But as the number of protesters grew into the thousands, the NYPD began to clamp down.
Our top story this half hour, dozens of activists are under arrest after their demonstration got out of hand.
Many of the run-ins with police were filmed by the protesters and uploaded online.
One of the most important characteristics of this movement is that it is defiant. It is disorderly. And so when the police are confronted with this open defiance, they have fallen back on pepper spraying people and mass arrests. But because of the fact that video cameras are everywhere and social media is there to transmit these images instantly around the world, these attacks have been seen as repression of the movement, and it's just stimulated more involvement, more sympathy, more mainstream media coverage.
It was in fact a clash between protesters and police that many believe transformed Occupy Wall Street almost overnight from a local demonstration into a worldwide movement. On October 1st, a large group of protesters marching to Brooklyn were led by the NYPD onto the roadway of the Brooklyn Bridge. The police stopped them at the midway point and arrested over 700 people. The entire incident was caught on camera and broadcast live around the world through the internet.
It was one thing for 5 or 6 or 50 people to get arrested. But when 700 people got arrested, it just blew this thing up into an international media frenzy.
And it wasn't just the NYPD.
For it was as if the police thought they were the exterminators and the students at their campus, UC Davis, were the cockroaches.
Police at occupations around the country also aggressively cracked down on the protesters in their cities.
Mayor Bloomberg, can I ask you a question?
2 weeks after the Brooklyn Bridge incident, New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg made a surprise visit to Zuccotti Park. He told protesters the conditions in the park had become unsanitary and that he would remove the occupiers so that the park could be cleaned.
Tomorrow's cleaning plan seems a lot like an eviction plan. We will resist any attempts to remove us from this park. To remove us from this park! We gotta make this place shine!
Given less than 24 hours notice before the city cleaning was to take place, the Zuccotti Park occupiers set about scrubbing down the park themselves, hoping to avoid eviction.
What I think is really going to happen is once sanitation or police or whoever show up, and then I think that they're going to try to remove us by force, and then they won't allow us to come back in.
If you really want to see what they're going to be doing to us tomorrow morning, check the rule board that they just put up on the wall.
The following types of behavior are prohibited in Zuccotti Park: camping and/or the erection of tents or other structures.
In addition to the cleanup notice, the city of New York erected a sign in the middle of the night listing a new set of park rules already being broken.
That's the reason now to come in here, sweep it, and throw us out.
So do you think it's going to be effective?
We can get 10,000 people out here, maybe people power will trump. You know, maybe they'll back off.
Please stay here!
Please stay here!
And please tell all your friends to come here to protect us from eviction!
The city scheduled the cleanup for 6 a.m. the morning of October 14th. The stage was set for a showdown.
So it's about 5:30 in the morning, and over the past few hours, thousands of people have descended on the park, and it looks like they're not going to go quietly.
In the early morning before the deadline, the police took their positions around the perimeter of the park, and the tension began to rise.
I have one question for you all. Who here is ready to defend our park? Who here is ready to defend our park? This is our time. Never surrender. Never surrender. Occupy. Occupy.
Big march coming in, sign saying NYPD, protect and serve the rich.
As the 6 a.m. deadline arrived, the sheer density of people now occupying the park made it obvious that it would be impossible for the police to clear the protesters out. And then, the announcement came.
We received notice that they are postponing their cleaning!
They just announced that the owners of the park have decided to postpone the cleaning. So I think the crowd is looking at that as a huge victory.
Coming up, after a victory for the protesters in Zuccotti Park, Occupy Wall Street digs in for a long winter. On October 15th, 1 month after taking over his park, the Occupy Wall Street movement organized its largest action to date.
So right now it's about 11 o'clock in the morning, and crowds are already beginning to mobilize, building up for a couple hours from now when they're all planning to head to Times Square.
All day, all week, Occupy Wall Street!
Through social media websites, Occupy Wall Street helped organize and inspire a day of political action around the world. From Paris to Colombia to hundreds of thousands marching in Spain, there were 950 protests in over 80 countries that day. Occupy Wall Street had suddenly become one of the largest worldwide protest movements in history.
All the people who don't want us to be here, they claim we don't have a unified message. So we're the unified message for 99%.
Bolstered by the success of the worldwide action on October 15th, back downtown in Zuccotti Park, the occupiers were digging in for a long winter. They began setting up sleeping tents and other semi-permanent structures in open defiance of city regulations. After a week of camping out with a tent, I was beginning to get used to the Occupy lifestyle.
It's freezing, but it's actually not so bad once you can once you're wrapped up in your sleeping bag and you got all your layers on, you can survive. All right, thank you very much. Thank you.
So I got my breakfast, but to go to the bathroom here, everybody still goes to McDonald's. I'm just gonna kind of sneak in like everybody else.
I may look a little rough, but I gotta say that I'm actually feeling pretty comfortable. There's free food in the park, hot food. If you get a little chilly, you can come in here to warm up, and then you go back outside when you're refreshed. I don't think the winter is gonna kill this movement. I think that people are prepared.
Are you making electricity?
I am making electricity.
That's awesome.
Yeah. This back wheel is attached to a generator. That's the battery it's charging. And then the batteries, once they're charged, can be dispersed and be able to power the camp.
I'm from DC.
As you can see, Occupy Wall Street has become a tourist attraction. When people are visiting New York, one of the first stops they're recommended to come down now is Zuccotti Park.
Some people came to Zuccotti Park to gawk at the protesters. Others came downtown to say thank you.
What brought you guys down here?
They wanted to see Occupy Wall Street.
It's not fair that some people have like this ton of money and then there's some people that can't even afford a home or anything like that.
And noticing how the ones that occupy Wall Street are the police. That's not you, that's the police.
The Zuccotti Park encampment had become a self-sufficient community. Tents, sleeping bags, clothing, medical care, even cigarettes were all free to whoever showed up.
So how long have you been out here?
30 days.
30 days. Where are you from?
I was homeless, actually, and I came here, and they gave me a place to sleep, they gave me food to eat, you know, and I started this little thing to make some extra money for, like, Subway, things like that, you know, and actually want to see if this can get any bigger and really, you know, raise it from the ground up, like one of those old American dream stories. That's what I'm hoping to do.
It's a great way to spend a Saturday.
Even people not sleeping in the park took on key roles. These chefs came from the Culinary Institute of America to cook meals for the occupiers. And this grandmother knitted scarves for those who were cold. Even dogs were taken care of at a section of the park called Occupy Paw Street, started by a group of tattooed freight train travelers.
We had like treats, leashes, and toys. And over here we have more like food, and in the buckets we have foods, and then we have blankets.
No, you were never doing anything like this before you came here, right?
No, I've never been involved with actually like making like a
contribution
to like
anything. Yeah.
And here are the veggies. The library.
Okay, library.
One of my jobs in the Occupy kitchen was delivering food to the individual working groups around the park that had texted their orders earlier in the day.
Can we tell him how much we love him?
Okay, welcome group. Guys placed a dinner order?
As Zuccotti Park became more efficiently run, it also became increasingly crowded. Occupy Wall Street needed more space.
As you can see, we're just building this space out.
Where are all these supplies coming from?
These supplies are coming from literally around the world.
The movement had already received more than $500,000 in cash and donations. The storage facility they moved into to hold it all was provided rent-free by the United Federation of Teachers.
People were sending packs of warm socks and sending sleeping bags and safety blankets, tarps, duct tape, hand warmers, sweaters, long sleeve shirts, t-shirts, sweatpants, jackets.
Looks like this stuff's going to be pretty important coming up pretty soon.
We're working on the cold weather stuff. Obviously, people aren't planning on going anywhere anytime soon.
How many do you think there are? Thousands?
Thousands. I mean, literally thousands. I mean, we're just opening up boxes now. They just keep coming in, and they come from all around the country.
Dear occupiers of Wall Street, we are so proud of you. Keep the faith for all of us. From South Georgia, the Wells family.
This is resonating with people. You know, we're getting these letters of support because they know better. They know that this isn't some marginal hippie drum circle in the park. This is a movement for economic justice that may be the best hope that we've had in a long time.
Coming up, the moment Occupy Wall Street feared for months finally arrives.
You will be subject to arrest.
After Occupy Wall Street protesters first took control of Zuccotti Park in New York's financial district, almost every major city in the United States now had their own Occupy encampment. The movement was costing cities like New York and Oakland millions of dollars in police overtime. And we were in the center of it, capturing it all. The patience of authorities was wearing thin.
Portland cleared out its protesters Sunday. Oakland the following day.
Mic check!
Mic check!
We'll be starting a discussion!
Back at Zuccotti Park in Manhattan, Occupy Wall Street facilitators were wrestling with the movement's growing influence around the world.
On whether the occupation should be sending delegates to monitor the Egyptian elections. Come join us!
Come join us.
It would be international activist solidarity between activist organizations there and OWS.
The trip would cost the movement nearly $30,000. After successfully resisting attempts by the police to clear the park and having fortified the camp for the winter, the protesters were feeling confident they were in Zuccotti Park to stay.
All persons must leave the park.
But the NYPD had different plans for them.
If you refuse to leave the park, you will be subject to arrest.
In the early morning hours of November 14th, hundreds of officers in riot gear began surrounding and closing off Zuccotti Park with military precision. Sanitation trucks and workers were called in, and the clearing of Zuccotti Park, the heart of the Occupy Wall Street movement, began. Our cameras immediately started rolling, along with the protesters, who started streaming live on the web. With Police Commissioner Ray Kelly personally overseeing the operation, the NYPD ransacked the park. Sanitation workers filled dumpsters and trucks with the protesters' belongings.
We don't move! We don't move! We don't move! We don't move!
When some refused to vacate the park, the police reacted the same way they had before, with overwhelming force. While many of the police officers showed extreme patience and restraint, others, despite the presence of so many cameras, seemed to go after the protesters. Very little effort was made to distinguish between journalists and protesters, and our cameras were slammed to the ground more than once.
Walk or you go to jail with your camera. We'll take your camera to jail. We'd love to.
While we managed to avoid getting arrested, dozens of other journalists weren't so lucky. But for every one that was arrested, there were hundreds more to capture every move the police made.
Stop resisting! Give us your hands! We're gonna get pepper sprayed right now! Why are you spraying?
We filmed this young girl being taken down and pepper sprayed by two police officers.
Okay. Back up! Everyone back up!
Move back! Move back!
You're gonna get it again! You're gonna get it again! Stay down! Stay down! Stand up!
In all, 200 people were arrested that night. Zuccotti Park was cleared and swept clean. The next morning, the protesters were allowed to return to the park, but were searched for tents and sleeping bags before being allowed in.
Protesters have had 2 months to occupy the park with tents and sleeping bags. Now they will have to occupy the space with the power of their arguments.
Well, this is where my tent had been, but this is where my tent once was. Not anymore.
I'm completely repulsed by this scenario right now. You know, like, who are these police really protecting?
Do you think this is going to hurt the movement at all?
No, absolutely not. I think it'll strengthen the movement.
We say! We say! We can win this war! We can win this war!
It's unclear to me what's going to happen going forward from this point on. But, despite losing everything, they're staying strong.
The movement is our life, in our unity. We can occupy different places every week.
On November 17th, 2 days after the raid that cleared out Zuccotti Park,
Shut down Wall Street! Shut down Wall Street!
Occupy Wall Street organizers called on supporters across the country to unite and join them in what was to be their biggest action yet.
Back up!
As the stock exchange prepared to open, thousands showed up on Wall Street in an attempt to shut it down.
So right now we're at the front of the march. We're actually on Wall Street. Got about a couple thousand people behind us. On the ends, there's people that are actually trying to get to work that are having trouble getting through the crowd.
What is your point? I'm trying to get to work.
You don't have a point.
Yes, I do.
You don't have a point.
Yes, I do.
Go to your senator. Go work it out for the government,
I
not
do
this
that.
Go
way.
to Washington. They're the hoes that gave the bankers the money.
Protesters began impeding traffic of those trying to get to work. The police responded by shoving people to the ground and making arrests.
Keep moving! Keep moving! Keep it moving! Keep it moving! Back it up! Back!
So right in front of us, there's a bunch of people that have just been arrested, including a woman in a wheelchair.
Nearly 200 people were arrested in New York alone that day, and some clashes between police and protesters turned bloody and violent.
The crowd's marching right down Fifth Avenue. The cops can't contain it anymore.
But as the day wore on and the number of protesters grew larger, there were simply not enough police to control the crowds. Thousands of protesters took to the streets, effectively shutting down Lower Manhattan.
Where are you from? Brooklyn. What do you think of all this?
What?
You don't mind being stuck in traffic?
No, not at all.
I'd say everybody we're passing in the cars, everyone's really supportive of this movement. This is the first time I've really felt like the whole city's behind it.
Oh man, there's literally thousands of people running through the streets. Revolution!
It's too early to know whether Occupy Wall Street will result in real systemic change, but efforts to silence the protesters have only increased public support. The presidential candidates have taken notice. Some banks have backed off charging customers egregious fees, and media coverage of corporate corruption has increased by more than 70% since the beginning of the occupation. One thing is certain, Occupy Wall Street has awakened the world to the power of the 99%.
Where we go! Where we go!
Is the occupation!
Is the occupation!
At Current TV, we salute the insightful perspective.
A reasonable Republican might run in the opposite direction. Good luck finding one.
At Current TV, we celebrate journalistic integrity.
Vanguard is going out there and aggressively pursuing stories that we believe are important.
At Current TV, we expect accountability.
There's the school sign. Here's the cigarette stand. No one has any problem with this.
And Current TV creates the commentary that drives the truth. This is the new Current TV.